The train yard smelled like hot metal, rust, and farewells. It was the kind of morning where the air sat heavy on your chest, not because of the heat, but because of what you knew you were about to leave behind. The sun was just peeking over the pines, casting gold onto the tracks like it was trying to make something sacred out of steel. It didn't work. Nothing about this moment felt holy. It just felt final. I stood with Mama on the platform in Augusta, Georgia, clutching a suitcase that weighed more in memory than in mass. It wasn't just luggage. It was a family heirloom disguised as canvas and wood, frayed at the corners, patched at the seams, and lined inside with bits of tissue paper Mama had carefully folded around my things. She said it had belonged to my great-granddaddy when he came back from the war and didn't want to talk about it. She had pulled it down from the top of her closet with trembling hands the night before and said, "This is yours now." We didn't say much that morning. We just stood there, shoulder to shoulder. I kept glancing at her out the corner of my eye, trying to memorize the details I'd never thought about until I knew I wouldn't see them again for a while. How her left eyebrow had a tiny scar from a childhood fall, how her fingers always moved like they were sorting invisible thread, how she hummed under her breath when she was nervous, always the same gospel tune. She wore her Sunday best, a sky blue dress with little pearls around the collar, the one she always said was too pretty to waste on funerals. Today, she made an exception. I think in her heart, this goodbye felt like a kind of death. "You nervous?" she asked finally, voice soft like the breeze but shaking underneath it. I nodded. "Yeah." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. Means it matters." I looked down at my shoes, polished to a shine that could blind God, thanks to Mama's elbow grease and vinegar. I didn't know what to say. I had rehearsed a dozen speeches in my head the night before. Promises, thank yous, maybe even a joke to lighten the weight in the air. But none of them fit the moment. None of them were enough. So I just said, "I'll write you. Every week." "You better," she said, poking me gently in the ribs. "If I don't hear from you, I'll come up there myself and drag you home by your ears." We both chuckled, and for a second, the heaviness lifted. But then the train let out a long, low groan as it slowed onto the track. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade. People started to gather their things. The conductor called out something I didn't hear because my heart was thumping too loud. Mama turned to face me fully now. Her eyes were bright, and not just from the sun. She placed both hands on my cheeks like she did when I was little and whispered, "Don't forget who you are." I felt the words go through me like lightning. Not a warning, a blessing. Then she pulled me into the tightest hug I've ever felt. The kind that makes you want to fall apart, just so you have a reason to stay. "You're going to see things up there," she said, her mouth close to my ear. "Things that make you question what you're made of. People that make you feel small just cause of the skin you walk in. But you remember, you come from warriors. From men who could read the sky and women who could carry water and wisdom at the same time. You hear me?" "I hear you," I whispered. She let go, slowly, like every second was a fight. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a neatly folded cloth. Inside it was a small envelope. "For when it gets real bad," she said, pressing it into my palm. "But don't open it unless you really need to. What's inside? Not for you to know yet, just for you to trust." I slipped it into my inside coat pocket without a word. Some things didn't need answers. The conductor shouted, "Final boarding," and suddenly the moment was here. We didn't hug again. Some goodbyes don't need a repeat. I climbed the train steps slowly, 1 foot at a time. Turned to look back once more. There she stood, small, strong, steady. The blue dress fluttering. Her hand raised, not waving goodbye, but holding me up. The train pulled away, and the world blurred. Through the glass, her figure faded into the distance, swallowed by trees and sun and memory. I sat down in my seat, the the suitcase at my feet, my fingers wrapped around the envelope in my pocket like a lifeline. That was the day I left home. Not just a town, not just a porch and a bedroom. I left behind a voice that taught me to pray. The hands that fixed every broken thing I brought home. The woman who taught me that dignity don't need permission. And all I had now was the suitcase. And her voice in my ear, whispering, "Don't forget who you are." The first thing I noticed about New York was the noise. Not just the loudness, though that was its own kind of violence, but the constancy of it. Car horns like battle cries. Subway grumbles like underground beasts. People shouting, laughing, cursing, and crying, sometimes all in the same breath. Georgia had quiet, space, room to think. But New York? It was a storm that never waited for you to catch your breath. I stepped out of the train station and looked up and up and up at the buildings that touched clouds without asking permission. Glass and steel giants, so tall they made you feel like the ground could swallow you whole and the sky wouldn't even notice. The suitcase felt heavier here, not because of the weight, but because of how tightly I was holding on to it. Like if I let it go, I'd lose the last thread that tied me to who I was before all this. I had one contact in the city, a cousin on my daddy's side named Marlin. I met him once when I was 6, and all I remembered was that he wore cologne too strong and laughed like he wanted the whole world to hear it. He let me crash on his couch in Harlem. The apartment was small, one room, no dining table, a TV that only worked if you slapped the side, but it had 4 walls and a lock. That was enough. Rent's $200 a month, he said, tossing me a pillow on my first night. You got 2 weeks to find a job. After that, you on your own. He wasn't being cruel. He was just being real. That's how the city worked. Nobody had time for dreams unless they came with a paycheck. The next morning, I pressed my shirt, tied my one good tie, and walked out the door like a man on a mission. I started with the bookstore 3 blocks down. I figured I had a shot. I loved books, talked polite, had a clean look. The manager, a thin man with glasses and a gold pen in his shirt pocket, looked me up and down with a tight smile. "We're not hiring right now," he said before I even finished my sentence. I thanked him anyway, just like Mama taught me. 3 hours later, I passed the same bookstore. A boy was sweeping the sidewalk out front. Blonde, pale, maybe 17, wearing the same button-up I had on, but with his sleeves rolled like he didn't need to impress anybody. The help wanted sign was still in the window. I kept walking. Next stop was the diner. Chrome booze, spinning stools, the smell of grease and old dreams. The lady behind the counter handed me a paper application and told me to sit. "You for down south?" she asked, without looking up. "Yes, ma'am." "Georgia." She smiled, not unkindly. "Figured. You talk like you mean every word." I took that as a compliment. They called me back 2 days later, not for the cook job I wanted, but for cleanup duty. "You okay with wiping tables and washing dishes?" the manager asked. He was the kind of man who said boy instead of young man without realizing it. "Yes, sir," I replied. And just like that, I was hired. The work wasn't hard. It just wasn't seen. I scrubbed ketchup from booths and picked up napkins with notes scrawled in ketchup. "We'll be stars, she's cheating, call your mama." But no one ever looked me in the eye. Not the customers. Not the waitresses. Not even the cook, a large man with arms like tree trunks who barked orders like insults. Some nights, when my hands ached and my pride curled up in the corner like it was ashamed, I'd walk home with my tie stuffed in my pocket and my eyes fixed on the pavement. The city didn't feel like it was built for boys like me. It didn't punish me. It didn't hate me. That would have been easier. No, it just ignored me. And that kind of silence cuts deeper. A week in, I saw a sign in a shop window, a tailor looking for an assistant. I walked in, introduced myself, showed him the careful stitches on the inside cuff of my coat. "My mama did that," I said. "She could sew blindfolded." The tailor, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers and a sharp French accent. Nodded. Respectable work, he said, but I'm looking for someone with experience. I told him I was willing to learn. I'd work for half. He smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the heart. I'm sure you would. I left with my fists clenched, the suitcase handle digging into my palm. That night, Marlon came home with two other men. They laughed loud, played cards, drank something sharp-smelling from mason jars. I tried to sleep, but I could hear one of them talking about a brother who got jumped 2 blocks down for wearing the wrong kind of nice. He had on a blazer and a damn tie, one of them said. Looked like he thought he was somebody. The room roared with laughter. I didn't laugh. I couldn't, because the next morning, I had planned to wear that same tie again. I had one more interview lined up, a security guard at a bank. I laid my clothes out on the chair, smoothed the fabric, folded them just like Mama taught me. And for the first time since I'd arrived in New York, I asked myself a question I hadn't dared speak aloud. How long do I keep knocking on doors that were never built for me to open? The suitcase sat at the foot of the couch, silent, patient, and inside it, somewhere beneath folded shirts and a bent photograph of home, was the envelope Mama gave me. I hadn't touched it since I arrived, but suddenly, I felt its weight like it was calling my name. The morning air was colder than usual, with a bite that crept through the seams of the window and nipped to my ankles as I got dressed. I moved slowly, deliberately. Today felt different. Or maybe I just needed it to be different. I laid out my Sunday suit across the back of Marlon's fraying armchair, black wool, 2-button double-stitched. The same one Mama had pressed with care the night before I left Georgia. She'd folded it over her ironing board like it was a second skin, whispering gospel verses under her breath as the steam rose from the iron like prayers being set free. It wasn't new. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, respectable, stitched with love and the kind of dignity you don't find on hangers. The left sleeve still held the faint imprint of her fingers, where she'd re-sewn the seam with brown thread because she was out of black. She called it my future suit. You walk like a man in this, she'd said, even if they try to make you feel like less. I wore it that morning like armor, tied my best knot, Windsor, just like the preacher showed me back home, and looked at myself in the cracked bathroom mirror. I looked sharp, eyes focused, jaw set. Today I told myself they'll see me. Not just the color, not just the threat. Me. The bank was 12 blocks away. I could have taken the bus, but I wanted the walk. I needed it. Each step felt like I was talking back to everything and everyone that told me I didn't belong in this city. My shoes tapped the concrete with purpose. My spine was straight. People noticed. That was new. Some looked twice. A few even nodded. A young brother selling incense on the corner gave me a respectful "Peace, King." That carried me 2 more blocks. I reached the bank at 8:55 sharp. A tall building with glass like polished judgment. I stood outside for a second to adjust my tie. A security guard watched me through the revolving doors. I offered a polite smile. He didn't smile back. Inside, the air was sterile, cold. The receptionist, a white woman with tight lips and tighter hair, looked at me like I'd tracked mud on a marble floor. "I'm here for the security position," I said. She glanced at her clipboard, then up at me. Her eyes paused on the suit, then darted to the suitcase I was holding, still patched and scuffed from Georgia days. "I think the position's been filled," she said flatly. "But the listing's still up," I replied, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "I can check," she offered, already typing like she knew what the answer would be. I waited, stood tall, kept my shoulders back. After a moment, she shook her head. "Yes. Sorry. Position's no longer available." I nodded slowly. "Thank you anyway." I walked back outside, disappointed but not broken. It had become a familiar feeling, a kind of bruising that didn't always show. I was halfway down the block when it happened. "Hey, you there?" "Hold up." 2 uniformed officers, approaching fast, Loud. I turned slowly, trying to read their posture. Try not to look startled. Try not to look guilty, even though I wasn't. You just come out of that bank? The taller one asked. Yes, sir. What were you doing in there? Job interview. The shorter one scoffed. In a suit like that? Carrying that old thing? He nodded at my suitcase like it was a threat. My grip tightened around the handle. It belonged to my grandfather, I said. MHM. You got ID. I reached into my coat slowly, like the world was watching. Handed over my license. The taller one looked it over, then stared me down. This address. Harlem, huh? Yes, sir. The shorter one stepped in closer, scanning me top to bottom. You don't look like you work security. I don't. Not yet. I was just. You know how many scams happen at that bank? People dressing up, casing the place. I wasn't casing anything. I was trying to get a job. They looked at each other. Silent conversation. No trust. Pop it open, one of them said, nodding at the suitcase. It's just personal stuff. Open. The bank. I knelt down slowly and unlatched the case. The hinges creaked. Inside, a folded white shirt. A pair of socks. Mama's gloves. My Baldwin book. A photograph of her in front of our house, squinting into the sun, wearing that same sky blue dress. The officer nudged it with his baton, like dignity was something you could poke. Nothing in here, he muttered. I wanted to say nothing but my whole life, but I stayed silent. After a moment, they handed back my ID. Stay out of places you don't belong. One said, not even looking me in the eye. Then they walked away. Just like that. I stood there, still kneeling, the suitcase still open. People passed. No one stopped. The city kept moving. I sat on the curb, closed the suitcase carefully, folded the gloves back into their corner, smoothed the photograph with my fingers. And that's when I noticed something. On the back of the photo, a note, written in Mama's handwriting. You got more in you than they ever want to see, but I see it. That's enough to keep going. I don't remember her writing that. Maybe she slipped it in before I left. Maybe I was never supposed to find it this way. But I needed it now more than ever. I stayed on that curb a while, watching the people, watching the world, and I realized something. The suit didn't make them see me, but it helped me remember who I was. And sometimes that has to be enough. I didn't move for a long time. The cold from the concrete curb crept up my spine as the traffic hummed by like nothing had happened. Horns, footsteps, laughter from a nearby coffee shop. The world just kept spinning like I hadn't been stripped of something I couldn't name. I sat with my suitcase beside me, hand in my lap, eyes on the spot where the officers had stood just minutes before. Their words still clung to the air. Stay out of places you don't belong. But I had belonged there. I had worn my best, spoke clear, moved slow, walked proud. I had done everything right, the way they tell you you're supposed to when you're young and black and trying to stay safe. And it still hadn't mattered. They hadn't seen my effort, or my history, or my hope. They saw a threat, and that cuts deeper than any insult. A pair of teenagers passed by, laughing and shoving each other. One of them looked at me. Maybe he recognized the slouch on my shoulders, the tight grip I had on my suitcase like I was afraid it had run off without me. You good, old head? He asked, half sincere, half curious. I nodded. Just once. He kept walking. I didn't blame him. Because what would he have done? What could anyone do? That's what they don't tell you about being black and bruised in public. It's not just the humiliation that hurts. It's the way the world watches you break and keeps walking. I closed my suitcase carefully, making sure nothing was folded wrong. Mama's gloves went in first. The book. The picture. I wiped it with my sleeve before placing it back between my shirts. I stood up slowly, the kind of slow that isn't from age, but from heaviness. Emotional gravity. I didn't know where to go. Marlon's place was too loud, too full of smoke and jokes that didn't land. The library was closed. So I just walked. Uptown. past shops with things I couldn't afford and restaurants that looked through me like I wasn't part of the neighborhood. Past bus stops with people who looked like me, but wore expressions like they'd forgotten how to look each other in the eye. Eventually, I found a bench in Riverside Park, sat down, and let my body breathe. The trees there moved gently, their leaves whispering something only the wind could understand. Kids played somewhere far off. A man jogged past in shorts too short, humming a Stevie Wonder song under his breath. That's when I saw him. An old man, maybe 70, maybe 80. It was hard to tell. He walked with a cane carved like it belonged in a museum, thick and polished, the handle curved like a question mark. His skin was dark, rich, deep like soil that grows things. He wore a cap tilted to the side and shoes so clean it made me sit up straighter. He moved like he owned time. When he reached the bench, he looked at me and nodded. "Mind if I rest here a while?" "Please," I said, scooting to the side. He sat with a soft grunt and laid his cane across his lap. We didn't speak at first, just sat, two strangers with decades between them and silence thick enough to hear the city breathe. Then he said, "Bad day?" I looked at him sideways. "How'd he know?" "Yeah," I said after a pause. "Real bad." He nodded like he already knew the story. "Let me guess," he said. "You wore that suit thinking it'd open doors." I blinked. He smiled without humor. "I've worn that same hope before." I said nothing. "I used to dress like that too," he went on. "Sharp, clean, like maybe, just maybe, it'd earn me a sliver of dignity in a city that thinks we're ghosts." I looked at my hands, still trembling slightly. "They stopped you?" he asked softly. I nodded. "Two of them. Treated me like I was casing the place. Told me I didn't belong." "Let me guess," he said again. "Didn't matter what you said. Didn't matter what you wore. They saw you, and they'd already made up their minds." I didn't have to answer. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out something small and folded. "I don't give this to just anyone," he said. It was a note, yellowed with time, creased and worn at the edges. He handed it to me. "They don't get to decide your worth," it read in bold handwriting. "Not their hands, not their laws, not their eyes. You come from kings who survived chains, from queens who raised nations in fields. You're still rising." I stared at the words. They hit something inside me I didn't know was still tender. "You wrote this?" I asked. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It was given to me when I needed it most. When I was sitting on a curb, feeling invisible, just like you." I handed it back, but he pushed it gently toward me. "It's yours now." I wanted to ask his name, where he came from, how he got here, but something told me that didn't matter. He stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. Before he walked away, he looked at me one last time. "You're not broken, son. You're just waking up to the fight." And then he was gone, just like that. I sat on the bench with the note in my lap and the wind lifting the edges of the paper like it was alive. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. But something shifted. Not everything. Just enough. The sun dipped lower in the sky. The light bent across the buildings like it was trying to find something it had lost. And me? I sat there holding a note from a stranger that felt more like a message from every ancestor I'd ever carried in my blood. I returned to that curb. Not on purpose. My legs took me there without thinking, retracing the same 12 blocks I'd walked earlier that morning in hope, now in silence. The sky had darkened to a pale gray, like even the sun was too tired to keep trying. Rain wasn't falling, but the air was heavy, swollen with the promise of it. I passed by the same bank, the same revolving doors, the same people in suits who looked through me like I was glass. But this time I didn't walk by. I stopped, right at the same spot where I'd been stopped. Then I sat. The concrete was still rough, still cold, still unforgiving. I placed the suitcase beside me, gently this time. Not like earlier when it had hit the pavement with a thud that felt like shame. This time, I rested it down like a friend. like something that had been through it with me. People stared as they walked past. A black man, in a suit, sitting on the sidewalk like he belonged nowhere. I could see it in their eyes. Some looked concerned, others annoyed. Most pretended not to see me at all. And for once, I didn't care. Let them look. Let them wonder. This was my city, too, whether it wanted me or not. A child tugged at his mother's coat as they passed. "Mama, why is he sitting on the ground in a suit?" She pulled him closer and whispered something, but I couldn't hear it. Probably didn't matter. I leaned back against the wall and looked up. The skyscrapers stretched high, same as before. Cold, straight, unreachable. They didn't bend for anyone, just like the systems that built them. And yet, people still built dreams at their base. Hoped anyway, laughed anyway, survived anyway. I pulled the old man's note from my coat pocket and read it again, slower this time, letting each word land. You come from kings who survived chains, from queens who raised nations in fields. How many had sat where I was now? Different curb, same ache? How many had worn their best just to be told they were still not enough? And still, they rose. They kept rising. I thought about my grandfather, the first to carry the suitcase. I never knew much about him, just stories Mama would tell in pieces. How he came back from war quiet. How he never raised his voice, but you listened when he spoke. How he walked the fields behind the house at dawn, muttering prayers in a language no one remembered teaching him. I imagined him young, standing in a line somewhere, uniform pressed, sweat on his brow, surrounded by men who didn't know his name but had already decided his worth. I imagined him being told no by men who smiled too wide. And I imagined him going home anyway, loving anyway, teaching my mother to stitch seams and hold her head high. That's legacy, not just bloodlines, but survival lines. I pulled the photograph of Mama from the suitcase, careful not to smudge the corners. Her smile was tilted slightly, her eyes squinting from the sun. But behind all that was steel, the kind of strength that could carry a family through generations. I held it up against the skyline and whispered, "I'm still trying, Mama." A man in a dark gray coat walked by and dropped a few coins at my feet. I almost laughed. I wasn't begging, but I guess that's what he saw, a young black man on a curb with a beat-up suitcase and tired eyes. That's the thing about the city. It sees what it wants. But I knew who I was, even if no one else did right now. Even if the suit didn't open doors. Even if the world kept trying to fold me small enough to fit inside its box. I sat there, not broken but waiting, letting the moment be what it was. Not performance, not resistance, just truth, just grief, just being. And in that stillness, something cracked open. Not in me, but around me. Because then came the voice. Gentle, familiar. "Mind if I sit?" I looked up. The same old man, same cane, same cap. Except this time, he didn't lower himself onto the bench. He sat next to me, on the curb, right there in the middle of the city's rhythm, like he had all the time in the world. Like the ground had always been good enough for him. "I figured you'd come back," he said. I nodded. Didn't plan to. Some things bring us full circle whether we want them to or not. We sat there for a minute. Then he said, "They ever tell you about the power of stopping?" Stopping, yeah. Everyone tells us to keep going, keep climbing, keep proving. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop. Sit down. Take up space. Be seen. I looked at him. I didn't feel powerful today. "You still don't get it," he said with a small grin. "You wore a suit. You walked proud. You looked the system in the eye. And when it spat in your face, you didn't shrink." He turned to face me fully. "You sat here, on this curb, with your head up. That's power, son." A breeze passed through the street, the kind that carries autumn in its breath. He reached into his coat again, this time pulling out a single glove, brown leather, aged but smooth. He handed it to me. "For your mama's collection," he said. I held it like a sacred thing. Why are you doing this? I asked. Why me? He smiled again, this time for real. Because once someone did it for me. Then he stood. No words, no goodbye. Just a nod. And he walked away, came tapping softly against the sidewalk. I sat there long after he disappeared from view, the glove in one hand, the photograph in the other. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself believe maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe none of us ever are. The night after the curb, I didn't sleep. Not because of noise. The usual Harlem chaos was somehow distant that night. It was something else. Something quieter. Something deeper. I lay there on Marlon's old couch, the springs digging into my ribs like reminders of where I was and who I wasn't yet. The light from a street lamp filtered through the blinds and cast thin gold lines across the ceiling. Outside, the city coughed and rattled like it was trying to stay awake with me. My suitcase sat open on the floor, neater than usual. The glove the old man gave me rested beside Mama's pair, hers delicate and faded, his worn and sturdy. They didn't match, not in color, size, or make, but somehow they belonged together. On top of my clothes, the photo of Mama faced upward, her eyes still squinting, her mouth caught between a smile and something else, like she knew what was coming before I ever did. And then there was the envelope, the one she had slipped in my hand at the station. For when it gets real bad, she'd said. I hadn't touched it since I got here. But now, I needed her voice. Not her advice. Not her instructions. Just her. So I sat up, turned on the lamp, and reached for the envelope. I held it for a moment before opening it, as if the paper might dissolve if I didn't touch it right. Inside was a letter, folded once, written in her handwriting, careful, round, and slightly tilted like she always wrote with her wrist, not her fingers. My sweet boy, if you're reading this, I know it's one of those nights. The kind where the world feels too big and you feel too small. The kind where nothing you do seems to matter. I've had those nights too. There were days I cried into my apron after you left for school, wondering how I'd feed us. Nights I stayed awake listening to the creaks in the house, praying they weren't something worse. But I kept going. You know why? Because you were watching. I knew even if I couldn't teach you everything, I could show you what survival looked like. And now, wherever you are, I want you to remember this. You're not out there just to make money or get respect or prove anyone wrong. You are there to build something. A life. A voice. A name they can't ignore. You don't owe this world perfection, baby. You just owe it your truth. And when you feel like you've got nothing left to give, read this again. I believe in you. Always have. With all the love in my bones. Manga. By the time I finished, I didn't realize I was crying until the paper trembled in my hands. Not loud sobs. Not messy, shaking grief. Just quiet tears, the kind that come from relief. Like finally being seen. I folded the letter slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it under my pillow. Then I got up, opened my suitcase, and pulled out the half-full notebook I'd packed from home. The one I brought just in case. The one I hadn't touched since arriving in New York. I sat at the tiny table in the corner of the apartment, turned on the desk lamp, and wrote. Der manga. I almost gave up today. I won't lie to you. I put on the suit you pressed with your own hands, walked into the world like a man, and got treated like I didn't belong in it. 2 cops stopped me outside the bank. Said I looked like I was casing the place. Said the suitcase I was holding looked suspicious. They opened it, Mama. They tossed it like it was nothing. Like it wasn't holding everything I carried from you. Your gloves, your picture, my whole heart. I didn't fight back. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there and let them dig through my past like it was something they could arrest. But later, something happened. An old man sat with me. Didn't ask for my story, just knew it. Like he'd lived it 1,000 times. He gave me a note that said, "You're still rising." And somehow, I started to believe it. I'm not writing this letter to complain. I'm writing because I want you to know I haven't quit. I'm still standing, Mama. Still carrying the suitcase. Still wearing the suit. Still remembering who I am. And for the first time since I got here, I think I'm starting to see why you let me go in the first place. Not because you wanted to lose me, but because you wanted me to find me. I love you. Always. Your son. I stopped riding around 4 in the morning. My hands ached, but it was the good kind of ache, the kind that comes from holding something heavy for too long and finally putting it down. I didn't sleep right away, but I didn't feel hollow anymore either. The next morning, I woke up with something I hadn't felt since arriving in the city. Not joy, not even hope, just clarity, that quiet voice inside whispering. You have something to say, and someone out there needs to hear it. So I picked up the notebook again, not for a job application, not for a resume, but for me, for Mama, for the next kid who would wear a secondhand suit and get stopped on the street. And that's when I started writing what would become the speech, the one that would someday fill a classroom with wide-eyed students, the one that would begin with a question. Have you ever worn a suit just to be seen? It had been 2 years since the curb, 2 years since the cops, the glove, the letter, since Mama's voice pulled me out of silence, since I found myself again, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. A lot changed in that time. I got a job teaching part-time at a community center, then full-time at the school. History and literature. I taught Baldwin and Zora. I taught resistance and rhythm, pain and poetry. But even then, I stayed away from telling my story. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wasn't sure it was mine alone anymore. Some things feel too sacred to hand over to a room full of strangers. That changed the day Ms. Collins, head of the Black Student Union, knocked on my classroom door. She had a warm presence and the kind of voice that made you feel like you'd just been hugged. She wore thick-rimmed glasses and a Protect Black Women pin on her blazer. You free next Friday? She asked, already knowing I'd say yes. What's the occasion? I asked. Heritage Month Assembly, she said. The students requested a guest speaker who looks like them, who's walked what they're walking. You came up. I smiled. You sure they won't tune me out? They'll listen, she said, if you give them something real. That stuck with me. Something real. Friday came faster than I expected. I stood outside the classroom, palms sweating, heart punching like it owed me money. Inside, 30 high schoolers sat in half circles around desks, hoodies up, headphones halfway in, energy low. The kind of crowd that smelled BS a mile away. I stepped in. No podium. No PowerPoint. Just me. A single chair. And a suitcase. I placed it gently on the desk at the front, the same way Mama placed it in my hands at the station. Some students perked up. Others leaned back, arms crossed. I waited. Let the silence stretch long enough to make them curious. Then I said, have you ever worn a suit just to be seen? A few heads tilted. One kid in the back muttered, he about to start preaching. Some chuckled. I smiled. No sermon. Just a story. I undid the latches on the suitcase. The leather creaked, same sound it always made, like it was clearing its throat before telling a secret. I came to this city with nothing but this suitcase. No connections. No shortcuts. Just a pressed suit and a mother's prayers. I pulled out the black gloves, Mama's pair first. Faded, frayed at the edges. These belonged to my mother. She wore them at church, to job interviews, to funerals. So they made her feel protected, like armor made of cotton. A girl in the second row raised her hand. Why gloves? Because she said a black woman's hands held too much to go bare. I answered. Joy, labor, loss, love. She said covering them was a way of honoring that weight. I placed the gloves gently on the desk. Then I reached for the photograph, held it up. This is her, right before I left Georgia. She gave me the suitcase, kissed my forehead, and said, don't forget who you are. I didn't understand what she meant. Not until much later. Another student asked, what happened when you got here? So I told them.
About the job hunt, the rejections, the day in the suit, the stop, the cops, the curb. I told them about the old man with the cane, the note, the glove, the silence. And then I told them the part that mattered most. That moment on the curb, that was the first time I realized the world doesn't get to decide my story. One boy sitting near the front, hoodie half zipped, spoke up. His voice was low, hesitant. But they still do, though. Like, they still look at you and see what they want to see. He wasn't asking. He was declaring something he'd already learned too young. I nodded. You're right. They do. I looked around the room. But that's why we write. That's why we speak. That's why we show up. Because we're not here to be what they expect. We're here to shatter it. Another hand shot up. A tall girl with braids and a notebook full of scribbles. Why'd you keep the suitcase? I smiled. Because it reminds me of who I carry with me. I tapped the lid. My mother. My grandfather. The old man on the curb. Every ancestor who walked before me, wearing hand-me-down hope and shoes with holes in them. I opened the inner pocket of the suitcase and pulled out the letter. My mama wrote this the day I left. Told me not to chase perfection, just to give the world my truth. I paused, let them watch as I unfolded it. And I read it. Not all of it, just the last lines. You don't owe this world perfection, baby. You just owe it your truth. I believe in you. Always have. By the time I finished, the room had shifted. The silence was different now. Not tense, not disinterested, but full, like something important had passed between us. Something fragile and necessary. I looked at the class and said, now it's your turn. They blinked. Next week, I want you to bring something. Doesn't have to be fancy, just something from home, from your people, and tell me what it means. They didn't groan. They didn't protest. Some even nodded, because this wasn't about grades. It was about memory, legacy, story. As the bell rang, I packed the suitcase slowly, one item at a time. One student stayed behind, the same boy who'd spoken earlier. Hey, he said, you said you still write letters? Yeah. He hesitated, then handed me a folded paper from his hoodie pocket. Can you read this? I was going to throw it away, but now, I don't know. I opened it. 5 lines. Simple. Raw. Dear Dad, I don't know why you left, but I still see you when I look in the mirror. And some days that hurts, but some days it don't. I looked up. Thank you for this. He shrugged. Thought maybe you'd understand. I did. More than he knew. That night, I walked home under the same city lights that once made me feel invisible. But this time, something was different. I was still wearing the same suit. Still carrying the same suitcase. But I was no longer carrying it alone. The gym was full. Rows of folding chairs lined with faces, students, parents, teachers, and neighbors who'd once passed me like I was part of the wallpaper. Now, they came to listen. Some for credit, some out of curiosity, some because their child came home last week talking about a man with a suitcase full of stories. The stage was bare except for one wooden stool and the brown leather suitcase. The same my mama gave me. Still scratched. Still stubborn. Still mine. I stood behind the curtain, holding the speech I'd rewritten 5 times. My palms were dry this time. No nerves. Just quiet. Peaceful. In the crowd, I spotted a few familiar faces. Miss Collins in the front row, arms crossed like a proud auntie. Malik, the boy who gave me the note to his father, sitting taller than I remembered. Braid's girl, real name Aisha, already scribbling in her journal before the show began. And one more face, one I hadn't seen in over 3 years. Mama. I don't know how she made it. Didn't ask. Didn't need to. She sat near the back, wide-brimmed hat tilted just enough to cast a shadow over her eyes. But I could tell she was smiling, maybe even crying a little, just like I was inside. The principal introduced me, said something kind but forgettable, and then I walked on stage. Not in my Sunday suit, not in a brand new blazer, just in the same coat I wore on the curb that day. I sat on the stool, placed the suitcase on the floor beside me, and looked out at the sea of faces waiting for something, anything to hold on to. Then I began. They say a man is only as strong as the story he's willing to carry. I didn't know that when I left home. All I had was a packed suitcase and a mother's hope. I opened the suitcase and pulled out each item, one by one. The gloves, the Baldwin book, the old photograph. Each time, I told the story behind it. Not rushed, not rehearsed. Just truth. Just truth. I told them about Georgia, about New York, about the bookstore, the diner, the bank. The two officers who searched me like dignity was contraband. I told them about the note the old man gave me. You don't rise when they lift you. You rise when you remember you're not buried. You're planted. I paused. Let the silence breathe. Then I said, I came here broken. Now I teach others how to stitch themselves back together. I looked at the students. Some were wiping tears. Others were leaning forward, elbows on knees, caught between disbelief and recognition. I closed the suitcase slowly. Legacy, I said, isn't just what we leave behind. It's what we carry forward. Afterward, there was applause. The standing kind. I smiled, but I didn't linger. I walked off stage and straight into the hallway, where the lights were softer and the noise couldn't follow me. I leaned against the cool brick wall and exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Still wearing that same old coat. Huh? I turned. Mama stood there, shorter than I remembered, but stronger too. Her eyes held stories I hadn't asked her to share yet. Not because I didn't care, but because I hadn't been ready to hear them. Until now. It still fits, I said, shrugging. She stepped closer and touched the lapel. You filled it out, she whispered. Took some time, but you grew into it. We stood there in silence, time folding around us. And she looked down at the suitcase. You kept it. I tried to let it go once, I admitted, but it kept calling me back. She smiled. You know why? I shook my head. Because it was never just about what you packed, she said. It's about what you unpacked along the way. We walked home together that night. Me, Mama, and the suitcase. No subway, no cab. Just the two of us, step by step, letting the city roll out beneath our feet like a long road paved with memory. We passed the bookstore that wouldn't hire me. It had closed down. A new cafe stood in its place, painted bright yellow with a black-owned sign in the window. Mama peeked through the glass and nodded. Better energy now, she said. We passed the diner. Still open. Still greasy. I didn't look in. Didn't need to. Not every chapter needs to be reread. At home, I placed the suitcase on the kitchen table and opened it one last time for Mama. She held the gloves, pressed them to her face, and whispered, Still smells like home. She found a Baldwin book, flipped to the underlined passage I always stopped at. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. She smiled. I'm glad you kept reading, she said. Then she handed the suitcase back to me. But I shook my head. Thought I'd leave it here this time, I said. Start carrying something new. She nodded, eyes misty. Whatever you carry, she said, make sure it's yours. The next week, I brought a new bag to school. Not leather. Not fancy. Just functional. But that day, when I entered my classroom, I saw something that made my chest swell. On every desk, a box. Small ones. Cardboard. Plastic. Shoeboxes. Old lunchboxes. A few with stickers. One wrapped in fabric. The students had brought their own suitcases. They opened them. Showed each other photographs, letters, recipes, medals, cracked phone cases, baby shoes, church fans. One kid brought a cassette tape. Said it was his dad's voice, the only recording he had left. Aisha brought a lock of hair from her grandmother's braid, tied in blue thread. Even Malik brought something. A keychain his father had left behind. Said he used to hate it. But now, he said, it's proof he existed. That I do too. And then I understood. The suitcase was never mine alone. It was ours. It was an echo, passed down, reshaped, retold. One story opening the door for 100 more. That night, I started a new notebook. The first page, in big bold letters, read,